Hello, hello, my brothers and sisters. This is Garrett Bake, your brother in arms, and welcome to another episode of The Tactical Businessman. That's right, Tactical Businessman. Why? Because we're going to provide you with the tools, tactics, and techniques to allow you to shift not only your business, but your personal life as well. Welcome to today's episode. The topic of conversation, fighting. Fighting, that's right. All you UFC guys are going crazy right now. You're like, woo, let's go. Nope, Joe Rogan's not on the show. I don't have any UFC fighters, so deal with it. All right. So listen, I want to get started talking about something. Do you remember the first fight that you got into? I did this podcast episode with a friend of mine, Troy Hoffman. He'll be on the show, I think, next week. I did this podcast episode with him in California a couple weeks ago, and it was him, myself, and a good friend of mine, Nick Long, who's also a business partner. And we're sitting around these chairs having this conversation, and we're like, what are we going to talk about? Like, we could talk about business, we could talk about motivation, we could talk about all these crazy things. But what do I want to talk about? And as we're sitting there trying to figure out, an idea popped into my head. I was like, I got it. They're like, what is it? I said, first fight you ever got into. And they were like, oh, yeah, that's a good one. So that became the topic of conversation, and eventually turned into the last fight that we got into. So I don't want to ruin any of that. I'll let you listen to that episode when it comes out. But listen, what was the first fight that you ever got into? The first fight. And it took me a minute to think about this one. Because growing up, like I grew up poor, right? I didn't have a lot of money. We grew up with the classic old school government assistance. Like the new school, you can go to McDonald's and Circle K and like restaurants and all over the place with your EBT card. When we grew up, it was oatmeal. That's right, dry oatmeal, powdered milk, sugar, like that kind of stuff. That's what I grew up in, right? I grew up in a small little border town. My dad was a teacher, and like that was the end of it. So wasn't a lot to go around. And I forgot where I was going with that. Okay, so but anyway, so my childhood, like I didn't grow up rich, but I didn't grow up in a bad area either. It was a little border town, right? But for the most part, like everybody was just kids, right? There wasn't anything crazy. So I didn't really have a lot of fights growing up. Conversely enough, my little brother, who is not as aggressive as I am, did get into a fight with a girl when he was 5 years old. She threw a piece of a brick at his face, nailed him right above the lip, split him open. He had to get 5 stitches. So I guess he got in a fight before I did with a girl. But my first fight that I remember, check this out. The first fight that I remember was when I was 7 or 8 years old. And it wasn't with a kid at school. It wasn't with a bully. It was actually with my grandfather. My grandfather. Let me give you a little history of my grandfather. He grew up in a rural town in Idaho to a couple cowboy homesteading parents. And guess what he became? He became the exact same thing, right? He became a cowboy. The rough and tough, like you're cut, spit on it, wipe it off, and keep going. You know, it's broken, tape it up. You know, grin and bear it. That was one of his main sayings. He wasn't a man of many words, but that was definitely one of them. Grin and bear it. So he was an old school cowboy, right? Man of not a lot of words, but very, very tough, because that's the way that he was taught, right? To be that way. Well, when I was 7 or 8 years old, we went to go visit them. Now, they lived in a town in northern Arizona. It was about 5 hours from where I lived. And we actually used to look forward to going there. There were pine trees. In the winter, it would snow. Like, he had a little, they had a little, what do you call it? An apartment, if you will. It wasn't ever occupied, so the kids like loved to like sleep in their own place. You know, it was just a ton of fun. I loved it. Great memories going up there. Well, I go up there one time when, like I said, when I was around 7 or 8 years old, and I have a loose tooth. And for any of you who have been a kid with a loose tooth, like you're scared of the loose tooth coming out, which doesn't make any sense. I know, but we all are. Like if you've got kids now, you know it's the exact same thing. Hey, let me just pull it out. No, right? And they'll fight you tooth and nail. Well, here's the funny thing. The first fight I ever got into, again, was with my grandfather. So I go there. I got a loose tooth. I'm complaining about my loose tooth. He sees that I'm complaining about a loose tooth, and he's like, let me help you take it out there, son. And I was like, no, I'll do this myself. I'm fine. I'll wait. I don't want it right now. And he's like, no, let me help you take it out. I'm like, no, I don't want you to help me. So eventually he grabs me, right? And this is a grown-ass man. He's, at this time, he's probably in his 60s, I'm guessing. Maybe earlier. He's probably in his 60s. So he's still got cowboy strength, and I'm just a 7, 8-year-old kid. Not a lot of strength. So he grabs me, puts me on the ground, face first, gets on my back, pinning my arms against my side, grabs a pair of pliers, and then proceeds to go to town, i.e., he was going to pull that tooth out. Now imagine for a second being this age, we'll just say 7 years old. Imagine being 7 years old, having a grown-ass man on your back with a pair of pliers coming at your mouth. Like, you're going to freak out, which is what I did. I freaked out, and I fought him. Like, as much as my 7-year-old body could fight him, I fought him. Wriggling, moving my head, like whatever I could do to fight him. And I remember like just not wanting it at all and fighting against him and fighting against him and fighting against him like as hard as I could. For me, it seemed like an hour. Honestly, it was probably like 5 minutes, maybe 10 max. But it felt like an hour to me. And I literally gave everything I had so that he wouldn't pull the damn tooth out. Eventually, he got bored or he got tired. He got up and he walked outside. Like, and left me there on the ground. And I'd been crying and screaming and like literally just let it all out. It was not going to happen. So it didn't happen. But I remember looking up and seeing like my mom, and she's watching this happen. Not moving, not doing anything, not saying anything. Just watching it happen. And at that moment, I felt this huge sense of abandonment, this huge sense of like nobody cares about me. I was exhausted. I remember like he walked outside and I literally passed out. I passed out pure exhaustion. And from that moment on, I had this feeling like it was me against the world. Like nobody's here to help me. Nobody's here to protect me. Nobody's here to take care of me. It's literally up to me. That became how I played sports. That became how I did everything at school. That became how I interacted with my family. It literally became me against the world. Think about that for a minute. The first fight you ever got into, do you remember it? Mine happened to be against my grandfather, and it shifted the way that I lived my life. It shifted the way that I carried myself. It shifted the way I acted. Like insane to go back to that moment and realize the impact of one little instance, one little situation. And the truth is, my grandfather really legitimately wanted to help me. He just had his own way of doing things, right? Which was the cowboy way. Like, I'm literally going to get a pair of pliers and yank this tooth out. So this shifted me, right? So my mother and I realized this from that point on, did not have a good relationship. Not because she was my mother, because she was my mother and I love her. But I always felt abandoned by her. I always felt like she'd left me out there. And so I would fight against her. Not just fight against her because, typical kid and mom, and they argue and go back and forth. I would fight against her because I felt like she'd abandoned me. And I think about sports. Sports are this huge, direct correlation to life, right? We think about sports and why it is that we play sports or how it is that we play sports. Like, sure, I wanted the camaraderie and I loved being around other, kids that were aggressive and wanted to win. But for me, it was this weird, fighting against the other team, literally fighting against. So I grew up again in this small little border town, and we had this rivalry against this other school. The school was called Buena High School. It was in Tucson, Arizona. And I remember my junior year of high school, I'd broken my jaw. It's a separate story that I'll have to share with you. But I'd broken my jaw, so I was out, right? My teeth wired shut. I'm sitting on the sidelines. There's no playing with me. Well, this other high school rolls into town, and it was literally like you could feel the hatred that we had for each other. I don't know why it started. I just knew we hated them. They hated us. Like, that was it. So about halfway through the game, there's a cheap shot on one of our players. And what happens? Well, they storm the field, and so do we. And it's literally like a brawl. The middle of a high school football game, there's a brawl going down. Logic would tell you, or would tell me, hey, dummy, you got your teeth wired shut. You should probably just hang out on the sidelines and not get involved. No. There wasn't much logic in my head. But this whole like idea of fighting against was there, and it was prevalent. So I grabbed a helmet, ran onto the field, and started swinging it. I remember hitting two guys, one guy who had his helmet on and one guy who did not. And eventually I got grabbed and they pulled me back and whatever. But this team, Buena High School, had to leave the city under police escort. Like literally 4 cop cars surrounding their buses so they could get out of town. But it was this huge hatred, right? This huge hatred against these people. And then I think about like getting married. So I got married, my wife and I, we met in high school. I got married and I immediately shifted the way that I felt about her. Sure, I loved her and sure I wanted, to take care of her and all these other things. But every time that she would say or do something that I didn't agree with, what was a prevalent thought that came into my head? Fight back. Fight back. And so this is what our relationship became. Not all the time. Like, of course, there were the loving parts and, cuddling and, of course, sex. We all love sex. But there were times, especially when there was conflict, where I immediately went to anger and hatred and wanted to fight. Now, I never laid a hand on her, but I would verbally abuse her. There were times that I'd punch holes in walls or break things. Like, this was me. This anger inside of me that I had, fighting against her. Then I look back and I think about my police career, right? It wasn't, I don't know, maybe a year. Let me see. Yep. It was about a year and a half after we got married that I started down this path of being a police officer. And what do they teach you in the academy? It's all about what? Protecting yourself, taking care of your brothers, like this whole idea and concept of going to war, taking to the next level. Well, guess what? I was pretty damn good at that. So I absorbed it, even more. It became this part of me. Now, not only am I going to go to war against, these other people, these bad guys, these villains, these criminals, but I was going to have brothers to my left and brothers to my right who were going to go to war against them with me. Got a badge, got a gun, got a vest, let's go, let's do this. And this was the dominating behavior that I had, was this fighting against the evil in the world. And I literally could not turn it off. It was dominating me. From the time I left briefing to the time I went home, I would literally, it's 5-10 minutes till I got to go home. I'm out pulling traffic trying to find something else or somebody else. Just over and over and over again. No concept of time, because it didn't matter to me. The only thing that mattered to me was fighting against evil. It didn't matter how many bad guys I put in jail. There was always another one. So I was going to go find the other one. So this behavior of fighting against it completely dominated my life. And then I think about my body. When I first started police work, I was slim and trim, right? But there got to be a point where I let things slide a little bit. Okay, I let things slide a lot. I was about 20 pounds overweight. Now, some of you might not think that's a lot. For me, it was a lot, especially going from 185 to 205. And it wasn't because I was bulking up in muscle. Some of you, it's more. But regardless, I didn't fit in any of my clothes. I felt like a fat slob. I didn't feel like taking my shirt off. And I always felt like what? I was fighting against my body. Because I could never get it the way I wanted it to. fighting against my diet, fighting against my workouts, fighting against running, fighting against exercise, fighting against everything. So if you look at the pattern of behavior that I had in my life, what was it? It was dominated by this I don't even know what to call it. It's a behavior, right? But it's even more this pattern, this dominating pattern in my life of fighting against. From the time that I can remember that my grandfather tried to pull my tooth out and I fought like hell and no one helped me. Okay, well, I was going to fight against me against the world, whatever part of the world, me against my family, me against other sports teams, me against marriage, me against police work, me against my body, like everything, me against, me against, me against, me against. And I just kept doing it over and over and over again. Like it was ingrained almost in my DNA. There were so few moments of peace in my life. Why? Because I was always fighting against. And I didn't understand why. I didn't understand. You ask some of the people that I used to work with, right? Especially when I was on SWAT and gangs and things like that. Like they would tell me, you don't have an off button. Like, dude, slow down. I was like, I can't. I physically cannot slow down. Like if you told me to come to work and sit in the office for 10 hours, I could not do that. It would drive me batshit crazy. Like the behavior had ingrained in my mind that if I wasn't fighting against someone or something, I was failing. How many of you can relate to this? Now, listen, I'm not just talking to you cops out there. I know there's a lot of cops that listen, but there's a lot of businessmen that listen. There's a lot of entrepreneurs. Hell, there's a lot of moms. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. How long have you been exhibiting this behavior of fighting against? And what has the cost been? I look back at my life at the cost. I did not have a real close relationship with my grandfather. I didn't. He literally scared the shit out of me. I didn't have a good relationship with my mother because I felt like she was trying to control me and dominate me, when really all she was trying to do was love me and guide me. But I didn't see it that way because I had this dominant behavior, right? So horrible relationship with my mother. Like I probably went 20 years, 20, count those, 20 years without telling her that I really loved her. Sure, it would be the typical, like, my mom's Puerto Rican, so she would say, te quiero, and I'll be like, te quiero, right? I love you, and I love you, right? But it was just a standard, hey, mom said it, so I said it. But there was no meaning behind it. There was no actual love. I think about my marriage, and you've all heard me talk about this numerous times. You've heard my wife talk about it. The effect that I had on my marriage, my behavior, this dominant pattern of fighting against, like literally almost crumbled our relationship, crumbled my wife, crumbled our children, like everything that I ever really loved, because I couldn't get rid of this dominant behavior. Think about the effects on my body. At one point, thinking I was having a heart attack when I was really having an anxiety attack, and finding out I'm pre-diabetic, and like just fighting against. So what changed? Like what changed inside of me that caused me to stop fighting against, that caused me to not want to literally steamroll everyone and everything in my way? There had to be a collision. There had to be a shift. See, I know some of you are aware that this is your dominant behavior. I know some of you are aware that this is how you act and interact with those around you. I get it. Again, this was me for so many years. But what hasn't happened to you and did happen to me is I had this huge collision, right? This collision with what I was doing, what I was thinking, and how I was acting. And it had to happen in order for me to what? In order for me to shift, in order for me to change, right? An object in motion will continue in perpetuity until what? Until it's acted upon by another force that's greater than it. Period. So I went to a program called Wake Up Warrior. Met a couple men, Garrett J. White, Sam Falsafi. And these men literally collided with me, not only in word, but in physical behavior, and shifted. Once they identified this pattern that I had, they shifted the way that I believed, not only about myself, but about those around me. And here's what shifted, right? You ready for the tool? Instead of fighting against everyone and everything, I had to learn to start fighting for. Instead of fighting against everyone and everything, I had to learn to start fighting for. Now think about that for a minute. They both exhibit a very similar behavior. They both require you not to quit. They both require you to go all in. They both are a dominating behavior. But one serves you and one doesn't. So ask yourself right now, are you still fighting against everyone and everything, or are you fighting for? So if you're a businessman, right? Either a high-ranking CEO, entrepreneur, like whatever it is, are you fighting against your employees every day? Are you fighting against taxes? Are you fighting against your competition? Are you fighting against yourself? Are you fighting against your upper management? Are you fighting, like, we could just go on and on and on against this fighting behavior. But seriously, ask yourself, in this environment, in this realm, are you fighting for your business, your employees, your upper management, or are you fighting against? Now, which one of these two do you think is going to serve you? One's going to destroy you. Guarantee it's going to destroy you or your company. Like one's fallen first and the other one's soon to follow. Like that's the way it happens. How do I know? Because this is exactly what happened in my life. Like my personal life was going to shit. It was going to hell because of this dominant behavior of me fighting against my wife, fighting against my kids, fighting against God, fighting against money, fighting against my body, like fighting against. And then what happened? Pretty soon my professional life started to crumble. Like I was literally kicked out of gangs because I couldn't control myself. Because I was so engulfed in this feeling like I had to fight against that I became a liability. Now, I didn't see it at the time, right? I was like, F you and your mother too. Like, you don't get me. You don't understand it. That's the way I saw it. But now looking back, I get it. This was the behavior that I exhibited. So is this the behavior you're exhibiting in your business? Is this the behavior you're exhibiting in your personal life? With your relationships, with your wife, your kids? Are you still using this behavior in your business or in your body? Are you still using this against God? I invite you to consider that. Your life would shift dramatically if you learn to stop fighting against and learn to start fighting for. Your priorities will shift. Your behaviors will shift. The way that you make and keep money will shift. Everything will shift if you shift first. The question is, are you willing to pay the price to shift? Because just telling yourself, oh, you know what? I'm going to quit fighting against. I'm going to start fighting for. Congratulations. Go to another Tony Robbins event. Because that's what they're going to tell you there. See, what has to shift, though, is your behavior, not your words. Your words have meant nothing up until this point. Your behavior has to shift. So how do we shift our behavior? We have to put ourselves in an environment where that happens. So the last 2 weeks, I've spent the majority of them in Idaho. And I've been running a couple of events. Events that were created to help men shift from where they were to where they want to go. Like, I can't put it in any more simple terms. I could get all creative and make this like really cool video and, you know, have Spartans and have all these other things. But here's the truth. Like, the truth is, it was that simple. Like, one of the men, right, we went through this evolution, we'll call it. And I was up in his face. And I was yelling at him. And he took it as what? He took it as this huge personal attack. So he came after me. Like literally came after me to fight. So he's trying to fight me, right? Fight against me. And I'm watching this happen, and I know exactly what's happening because it was me for so long. And finally, we get to this point, right? I wrestle him down to the ground. I'm holding him down on the ground, and he's getting more angry and more mad and just rage and fury and passion. And he gets up and he wants to swing at me, and I grab him from behind the neck and I pull him in close. And as I'm holding him back and close at the same time, I just whisper something simple in his ear. It's time to quit fighting against, and it's time to start fighting for. And immediately, tears started streaming down his cheek. Immediately, he started sobbing. See, because for once in his life, he realized that he'd been fighting against everything in his life. Fighting against his ex-wife, fighting against his kid, fighting against traffic, fighting against his career, fighting. And it gets exhausting. It gets tiring. And eventually, you don't want to do it anymore. You wonder why suicide rates are so high. We've talked about suicide. We've talked about PTSD. We've talked about all these things on this podcast. But you wonder why they're so high. It's because we can't figure out how to stop fighting against everything and everyone and how to start fighting for. I guarantee you this man's life has shifted. I don't like to say it was because of me. I just happened to be put in that place to help him find the gift that he was looking for. But ask yourself, how would your life be different if you were in this situation? How would your life be different if you started fighting for instead of fighting against? Listen, this is why I created this experience called the Tactical Businessman, right? The purpose of it is simple. It's to provide you with the tools, tactics, and techniques to get what you want out of life. You want more money? Cool. You want more sex? Cool. You want more connection? All right. More purpose? Check. Like whatever it is that you want in life is possible, but you have to shift the way that you're going after it. So in this experience, I take two things. I take everything that I learned as a police officer, all the tools, tactics, and techniques. Everything that I learned being a certified trainer through Wake Up Warrior, all the tools, tactics, and techniques. And I merge them. I merge them into this experience. Sure, it looks cool on paper, right? You're going to be shooting guns and you'll be fighting and like some really fun stuff. But there's a purpose behind it all. Because the last thing that I want is you to go home after another Tony Robbins event and ask yourself this question. And now what? I've done this numerous times. But once you have the tools, tactics, and techniques in your possession, now you get to deploy them to make you more money, to increase your business, to increase your take home, to have more sex, to have more connection, to be bonded with your children, to have a better body. Like whatever it is that you're after can be yours if you choose to play all in. But you have to put yourself in that environment. I had to do it. The men that I run with had to do it. And every man that I've had the pleasure of working with had to do the same thing. Because otherwise, it was just another mental hand job. Wow, that's cool. Let me fill up another freaking notebook with really cool quotes and really cool sayings and stuff it in the closet with everything else and never go back to it again. All right. Guess that was a little heavy to end it, right? But hey, I'm just going to give you the truth here. And I'm going to give you the tools that you need to get what you want. So there you go. A powerful question that can, if you allow it to, shift the way that you live your life. All right. Well, that is it for today's show. As always, stay safe. And we'll see you on the next one. You ready for more? You ready to find out if this experience is right for you? Go to thetacticalbusinessman.com. It is by application only. That's right. Not for everybody. I got to make sure that you're the right fit. So go down there and check it out. All right. Take care. We'll see you on the next one.